Just a few announcements, a few things to say. Tomorrow, if you're going to be joining us in the morning, the family service begins at 9 a.m. in the main sanctuary. If you're coming for the little service, that's the 0 to 5-year-olds, you're welcome to come. It's a really good time, I have to say. Controlled chaos. It's good practice for this service. That'll be down here at 9:15. The adult study is actually going to be on 84th Street at our neighboring church. Rabbi Spratt will be teaching tomorrow morning, and that's going about 9:30 to 10:30-ish. Of course, the congregational services will begin at 11 o'clock here in the main building on 83rd Street. If you're going to be joining on the alternative service, you'll be joining me over on 84th Street, the same site at the church. That begins at 11:30. So a little bit of a later start. And as well, we'll continue on throughout the day with our afternoon at 3 o'clock. These are tentative times. I was told not to give permanent times because you never know. 4:15-ish for Yisker, that's ish. And then 5:15-ish, 5:30 for Neila. So we will hopefully end with Havdalah together out on the street here on 83rd Street. Weather permitting, of course. Rabbi Carroll, a couple hours ago, spoke about bread at her sermon. I won't do that to you at this point of the evening, in the middle of Yom Kippur. I'm going to talk about something a little personal, more historical. Maybe something that you didn't know. In 1968 was a year of stunning calamity. It saw the deaths of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. The Bronx was burning, and our nation was gripped by confusion and dread. Now, the night before RFK was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, a little puppet appeared on television and asked this question: what does assassination mean? Now, that puppet was a tiger named Daniel Striped Tiger. And his voice belonged to a new children's TV host by the name of Fred Rogers. 1968 was not only a year of calamity, but also the birth of something remarkable: Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, a public television show hosted by an ordained minister who spoke directly to children, turning his little neighborhood of make-believe into a village of empathy, knowledge, and wonder. Now this summer, Ashley and I went to go see Won't You Be My Neighbor, a documentary about Mr. Rogers. Did anybody else see it? Now, I don't know about you, but even though I watched the show as a kid, the film taught me a lot that I did not appreciate at the time. Like how the discussion of RFK's death helped Rogers become for children and parents a soothing voice of reason and calm. He guided and consoled a grieving nation, a job he took on again and again, right up to the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. Fred Rogers' lessons were simple. Listen. Listen to your children. Listen to each other. Pause for a moment and listen. Be a good neighbor and friend, and take action to help your community. Now, these ideas are so simple and so familiar that there is a risk that we might see them as pat. But really, they are radical, and they are not just for children. So let's talk about listening. Mr. Rogers once said, "When children bring up something frightening, it is helpful right away to ask them what do they know about it." And we often find that their fantasies are very different from the actual truth. What children probably need to hear most from us as adults is that they can talk with us about anything, and that we will do all that we can to keep them safe in any scary time. Now, I'm sure that many of us have a very personal relationship with Mr. Rogers. The image of him putting on that classic cardigan, lacing up those sneakers ever so delicately, tying the knots. And that image reminds me of the safety and security that I felt during my childhood. And now, one of the great joys of my life is the time in the morning when I get to sit with my daughter on the couch watching Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, the rebooted version of Mr. Rogers. I don't think it's as good. Now, today, the challenges that our children face are just as complex, if not more so, than the ones that we faced or our parents faced. Yet what has not changed is the stunning central idea that Mr. Rogers understood and tried to teach in every episode. When we love a person, we accept him or her exactly as is, the lovely with the unlovely, the strong along with the fearful, the true mixed in with the facade. And of course, the only way that we can do that is by accepting ourselves that way. And that starts with listening. Before you can accept someone, you have to hear them and see them. Just listen. A very simple idea, and yet a very hard one to put into practice. Now, Mr. Rogers' second lesson, be a good neighbor. It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? So, of course, Mr. Rogers is most famous for this saying, won't you be my neighbor? It was a line in the show's theme song, and it's probably the line that we remember the most all these years later. And it was the title of the documentary. So ask yourselves, what are you doing here today? Did you come here to be judged by your friends and your neighbors? Or did you come here because this is where you needed to be to not feel judged, to feel supported and loved by those that are around you? We stand together when we ask for forgiveness because no one person is greater than any other. As a community and as neighbors, we are all the support that we need. And still, we have moments where we feel alone in this world. New York City is one of the largest cities in the world, teeming with people day and night, and yet it can also be the most isolating. How can we combat and push back against the sense of loneliness? It is so easy in our connected age to hole up with our phones or our tablets to distract ourselves into oblivion. But the high holy days offer a moment to pause, to reflect, to listen, to look around, to remember that you are a part of a community of neighbors that sit right next to you. So look in front of you, or next to you, or behind you. Are you next to somebody that you know or someone that you have never met? Together, we make up a wonderful and diverse and beautiful community of seekers. And even though it may not always feel that way, Mr. Rogers reminds us that if you could only sense how important you are to the lives of those that you meet, how important you can be to the people you may never even dream of, there is something of yourself that you leave at every meeting with every person. The impact that you leave on another person is often not realized or measured at that moment. It can be felt and remembered years or decades down the line. Ask any teacher or camp counselor who bump into one of their students or campers. They will tell you the impact realized that day began many years before. Now, as Rob was saying before, this year at Congregation Rodef Shalom, we will be launching Shalom Sprouts, our newest initiative for young children and their grown-ups who care for them. Offered in our beautifully renovated 5th floor. You have to check it out. It is beautiful. We will welcome in the next generation into our vibrant Jewish community. But perhaps most importantly, we will affirm the teachings of our people and impart on the youngest amongst us that Judaism is a religion of love of the self and love of others. I believe that the youngest members of our community can have authentic and beautiful Jewish experiences that will leave an impact on who they are, at the very core of who they are. And though I may not know if that made a difference on their Jewish journey this year or next, I do believe that it will make a difference down the line. Now, tomorrow, we will read from the book of Leviticus, a section known as the Holiness Code. And perhaps the greatest principle of Judaism is found within its verses. Ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That is the greatest principle. Not individual acts of piousness, not ritual service, but to love your neighbor. So simple, and yet so hard to put into practice. And the last part of that phrase is crucial. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that your fellow human being is a mirror. If there is love and compassion in your soul, you will see the goodness in others. If you see a blemish in another, it is your own imperfections that you encounter. Now, take careful note of the flaws that you perceive in others. We are likely to be oblivious to our own defects, but can easily detect shortcomings in other people. The Baal Shem Tov instructs us to take such observations as indications that we have these shortcomings ourselves. What a tremendous idea that the way God allows us to see our faults is through other people. Now, I know from my own personal experience, the people who arouse these feelings in me, I pretty quickly realize are doing something that I used to do, or still do to this day, that I don't like about myself. Viewing the world through a mirror provides us with two opportunities. The first, teshuvah. When we become aware of qualities and character traits in others, we are able to work on or refine those same traits within ourselves. If we think about these matters, we can begin to have a better understanding of ourselves and how our behavior can affect and effect others in ways that we may not have realized. When we notice the faults in others, we should see that as a red flag that we also have work to do. And second, have compassion on yourself and on your neighbor by loving your neighbor as you love yourself. I think that everyone can probably agree that loving your neighbor is a good mitzvah to strive for. But when it comes to loving those people who bother you, it's definitely much easier in concept than practice. It is true that to love someone, even a neighbor, isn't easy. We all have friends or family or neighbors that drive us up the wall. Everyone has a Ned Flanders, that frustrating neighbor from The Simpsons. To love your neighbor forces you to stretch yourself, to look beyond yourself, and enter into a relationship with another. When we realize that the reason these people bother us is because they're struggling with things that we ourselves have struggled with, it should immediately spark feelings of compassion. The mirror is the key to loving those whom we have trouble loving. You can love them as yourself in the same way that you give yourself breaks and rationalize your own personal faults. Let's just extend that perspective on them. To be humble and vulnerable is hard, but the reward that love offers us is as necessary to us as the air that we breathe. As Fred Rogers teaches, love isn't a state of perfect caring. It's an active noun, like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way that he or she is, right here, right now. When we begin to recognize in each other the divine spark that exists within each of us, we are able to move past the differences that we perceive. It is not about truth or faith, but the simple human idea of dignity, that each of us is created in the image of God, and that each of us has the ability to act as such. Mr. Rogers' third lesson, action. And Mr. Rogers once said, "There are many ways to say that I love you. There are many ways to say that I care." He gave some examples, and being there when things are sad and scary, or cleaning up a room, hanging up a coat before you're asked to do it. I should have done that a lot more as a kid. Maybe drawing special pictures for the holidays, making plays. But ultimately, the most important thing that we can do is to share our love with the people that we care about most. As you grow, I trust that you are finding many more ways to show and tell people that you love them, he said. Those are the most important things that you'll ever learn to do, because loving people and animals and the world we live in is the most important part of being alive. And finally, of the many lessons taught by Mr. Rogers, maybe the idea that we can work together to make a difference right where we are is tantamount to all. So in one of my favorite episodes, also highlighted in the documentary, Mr. Rogers invited an African-American police officer, played by Francois Clemens, to rest his feet in a pool on a hot day. And Morgan Neville, the filmmaker who made the Rogers documentary, writes, "Fred was, in his own way, his own subtle way, trying to model how we should treat each other. It's really the thing that he's doing over and over and over again when he asks, 'Won't you be my neighbor?' What he's really asking is, how do we treat each other? What kind of neighborhood are we going to have? What are the rules by which we live in a society together?" It is so simple and yet so hard. I can think of no greater lesson to teach our children in today's current political and social reality, that action is demanded of each of us to see the divine sparks that exist in the other. For one, when we reach out to those outside who are in need, this is the power of mitzvot, the power of tikkun olam, the Jewish command to go out and make the world a better place than how we found it. Love is not just about caring. It is about responsibility to another person. Rabbi Daniel Ruttenberg teaches that in Hebrew, the word for responsibility is achrayut, from the word acher, which means another. It's about the willingness to move beyond yourself and to enter into the space of another. And when we do that, we find not only do we make change, but that we ourselves are changed. The transformation isn't over there. It's here, within us, between us, and the spaces that are around us. And our community has certainly answered this challenge and call to be responsible to the other. As you know, CRS is one of the charter members of the Refugee and Immigration Coalition. And through the hard work of our refugee task force, we have successfully resettled 3 young men, originally from Pakistan, and we await a 4th who is soon to arrive. We are proud of this sacred work and see it as living out the core values of our community. Now, I believe in this community's ability to push forward and push beyond that simple notion that the world is broken. I believe in our community's strength and resolve to see the challenges are not going to cause us to withdraw, but instead offer us opportunities to reach out a hand and hold each other up. Next month, our community will come together for yet another mitzvah weekend. Our congregation's name consists of 2 words, Rodef, which means pursuer, and Shalom, of course, meaning peace. And this year, we will partner with each other and organizations all around the area to push back against food insecurity, and become actors and pursuers of justice and peace. Rodef Shalom. Today, more than ever, that appears to be the challenge that is in front of us. In a world where the rules of society and common decency are beginning to disintegrate, we come together in defense of that, and in many ways, in spite of that. We, the Jewish people, have always created our own rules for how we believe a society should live together. And though it is far from perfect, a community that is based on the core belief that we should treat each other the way that we want to be treated is a community that I believe can withstand and stand up to the greatest injustices of the world. It is so simple and yet so powerful. Fred Rogers used to say that when I was a boy, I would see scary things in the news. My mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." So this year, if you have not ever before, come to be a helper. Whether it be volunteer to visit with the elderly, restock shelves at the food pantry, volunteer at our shelter, or sign up to be an advocate, this year you can help and really make a difference. So a story that I'm sure that you have all heard before. One day a man went to a village and all of the people were hiding. There was a farmer that came, and the man asked the farmer why everyone was hiding in their houses. And the farmer said that all of the people of the village were hungry and the children were weak. So the man went to a lake and filled a pot with water, and he added a stone to that pot full of water and brought it to the village. He put it on a fire to cook. The farmer asked him, what was he making? It was stone soup. The farmer said that he had never heard of stone soup before. Could he try some? Well, of course, but it would taste so much better if you had a potato to add to it. So the farmer gave him a potato. And along came another villager, and he asked the man, what was he making? The man said it was stone soup with potatoes. The villager said he had never heard of stone soup with potatoes before. Could he try some? Of course, but it would taste better if you had some beans to add to it. And a woman came along, and she added an onion. And another person came along and added some carrots, another celery, some radish. And after a while, the soup pot was filled with many wonderful flavors, and the entire village had a big feast. A village elder offered the stranger a great deal of money for that magic stone, but he refused to sell it and traveled on the next day. As he left, the stranger came upon a group of village children standing in the road, and he gave the bag containing the stone to the youngest child, whispering to him. It was not the stone, but the villagers that performed the magic. By working together with everyone contributing what they can, we can achieve a greater good. It doesn't take much. A potato, an onion, a smile, a hug. In the 50 years since Mr. Roger debuted, it is clear that part of the appeal of his neighborhood remains that his neighborhood could be any neighborhood. It could be a small village, or a big town, or the Upper West Side of Manhattan. When I think of a world that I want for all of us, the world that I want my children to grow up in, I think of a world that Mr. Rogers would be proud of. A world that is built on love and not hate. A world that is built on respect and not distrust. A world where the things that keep us together are greater than the ideas that set us apart. I believe in all of us and the power that we have to make this world a better place. And so it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Please, won't you be my neighbor? Shana Tova. So now, as we begin to conclude